Section 17 of Hearth and Home, Collected Poems and Stories by Various. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Astray in the Snow by J.D. Burton. All day the heavy gray clouds had been scudding across the sky, and now at 2 p.m. they seemed to rest like a monk's cowl on the summit of old Helderberg. The air seemed thick with snow, and yet not a flake had fallen hitherto, but now the great white plumes took shape and fell everywhere. Farmer Burton rose stiffly from the great armchair where he had indulged in an after-dinner nap, and looked out. "Well, wife, I guess this will be the heaviest snowstorm we've had this winter. It's lucky I went to mill and got them things at the grocery, for if I'm not mistaken, the fences will be covered before morning." "Yes, father," answered a pleasant-faced, portly matron as she seated herself with a basket containing innumerable balls of yarn, and drew up beside her another filled with stockings, mittens, and home-knit scarves, all of which were to undergo a close inspection, and even the suspicion of a hole, fortified by the bright darning needle. After selecting a mitten and drawing it on her hand and looking thoughtfully at it, she continued, "I wish everyone was as well prepared as we are. Is that George threshing?" "Yes, I suppose so. He wants to finish getting out the oats this afternoon, and I ought to go and help him. This threshing is back-breaking business. I think I'll keep the machine a day or two longer next year and have it all done." "Pity you hadn't this. I hate to see you so tired," responded the wife as he took down his hat and prepared to go out. The brief winter afternoon soon slipped away. The muffled thuds of the flails as they beat the grain from its sheath of pale gold made company, as she expressed it, for her. Social in nature, she sometimes felt very lonely when the duty of the farm called husband and son to some remote corner where she could neither catch a glimpse of them nor hear their voices guiding their teams for many hours. Then she would muse on what might have been if little Emily had lived. 10 springs had the white roses blossomed on the little grave, and as many winters had it been whitened by the snowflowers, and still the mother's heart yearned for the lost one. She was often saying, if Emily had lived, she would be such or such age. Now it was 17 come next April. Then she would sigh softly, "If she could have been spared for George's sake. I wonder the boy is so contented at home with nobody but father and me." She had thought and spoken of her husband by that paternal title ever since the prattling tongues of her little ones had learned to lisp it. But he is fond of his books, and that is company for him. Then the fond maternal heart would brood over some little plan, some bright surprise for her darling. Oh, well might he be content in that Arcadian home where love ruled and the pomp and pride of worldly show had never come. The early twilight gathered shadows in the corners of the room as she rose and put away her completed task, and drew the table out, covering it with snowy linen, preparatory to the evening meal. Supper it was always called there. She heard her husband stamping the snow from his feet in the entry, and presently his voice saying, "Bring me a broom a minute, please." As she handed him the desired utensil, she saw the necessity for its use in the pile of snow that had fallen inward on opening the door. He saw her look of surprise. "Yes, it does storm awful. I pity any poor soul that is out far from shelter tonight." "I hope there are none," heartily responded the wife. "There, that will do," as he continued brushing vigorously at the few remaining particles of the intruding element. "Now come in by the fire. I suppose George stayed to see to the cattle?" "Yes, he's giving them a fresh bed from the straw we threshed this afternoon. He's as tender-hearted as a gal, and couldn't sleep in his bed if he thought one of them creatures was suffering." "Bless the boy," responded the mother as they entered the warm, cozy room. The lamps were burning brightly, the table garnished with a good substantial meal that looked sufficiently inviting when the boy, standing very near 6 feet, came in saying, "All right, mother. I see supper is ready, and I shall be very soon. for I have an excellent appetite after our sharp day's work. But the oats are threshed, eh, father?" "Yes, my son, thanks to your energy. We both worked hard enough, but you accomplished the most. Our boy is the better man of the two now," glancing at his wife after a proud look at the youth. Supper over, the weekly paper was brought out. When the last item of interest had been read and discussed, George felt at liberty to devote the remaining hour to a favorite author. This was his happiest time. True, he enjoyed his work, but when all was done, to sit so, with those dearest so near that he could put his hand and grasp that of his father, or lean forward and print a kiss on the round and still rosy cheek of his mother, while he read of far-off lands where were strange men and beasts and birds and creeping things, was real pleasure. Sometimes a yearning to see all these wonders came over him, but one look at the bent shoulders of his father, or into the loving eyes of his mother, and the desire was smothered at its birth. No, I could never leave them. It would break their hearts. I will be content that others shall see and know, and I through them. They were early risers in Farmer Barton's household, and of course early to bed. So as the clock told the hour of 9, George closed his book, brought his lantern, and prepared for a visit to the barn, to see that all were snug and comfortable before retiring. He had been absent but a few moments when his voice was heard calling, "Mother, open the door, quick!" Hurrying to comply with this request, she was met by her son, carrying what she at first thought a child. She could not see the face, but a fair curl that strayed over his supporting arm, and the little foot that peeped from beneath the dark dress might reasonably be supposed to belong to a girl of 12 years. Without a word he crossed the room and deposited his burden on the lounge. Then, to the eager questions of his mother, he replied, "I found her just outside the gate, half buried in the snow. She must have been there a good while. Are there any spirits in the house?" Then, as his mother approached with a blanket she had snatched from a bed in an adjoining room, he raised the stiffened little hand, looked at it a moment, and said, "As I feared, her hands are frozen, and you had better look to her feet, while I bring a bucket of snow. We must get rid of the frost before trying to warm her." In an instant, Mrs. Barton was removing the dressing from her feet, saying as she proceeded, "Humph! Shoes like a kid glove and cotton stockings, as I live, to be out in such weather. Here, George, some snow, and father, there is hot water in the tea kettle. You just mix a good strong brandy sling. I think that will bring her round." And so these faithful souls labored to rekindle the flame of life that was ready to go out forever. While George applied the snow to the little waxen fingers, he had time to study the still, pale face lying there like a white lily on the dark chintz pattern of the sofa cushion. It was not the face of a child, but of one whose feet had just crossed the borderland and were now on the threshold of womanhood. She might be 17. Small as she was, the outlines of her figure were softly rounded, not angular like those of an undeveloped girl. "There, George, what do you think? Will it do to wrap them up now?" For just one instant he took the dimpled foot and held it in his hand. The pink was coming into the tips of the toes, so he said, "Yes, the frost is out. It is safe to get them warm now as soon as you can." The sling was brought and a few spoonfuls poured carefully into her mouth. A little quivering sigh rewarded their efforts, and then a pair of eyes of purplish blue opened and gazed with a bewildered look about the room, finally resting inquiringly on the good couple bending over her. With native modesty, George had withdrawn as he saw the trembling lids rising, and now stood out of view by the window. The mute question was answered by Mrs. Barton. "You are safe among friends, my dear, where you shall be as comfortable as we can possibly make you." A look full of gratitude rewarded these cordial words, and, nestling among the soft cushions, she was soon in a peaceful sleep. When this was apparent, Mrs. Barton addressed her companions. "Now, father and George, you go to bed. I shall stay here and keep the fire going and see if she wakes or wants anything." George looked as if it would not be a great hardship to keep his mother company in her watch, but seeing that his presence could well be dispensed with, he took his departure after a lingering look at the sleeper and a whispered request that he should be called if needed. The blue smoke rose on the clear, bright air, and as the sun's rays first touched it, it looked like a pile of soft, aerial cushions tinged with crimson and gold, while below all was white and still. Here and there a fence stake protruded from the slight elevation that marked the course of walls not less than 3 feet in height, where a few trees lifted snow-laden branches in the morning light. The door softly opened, and the face of her son appeared, as Mrs. Burton turned with a finger on her lip and a cheerful nod, indicating that all was well, but she wished to have quiet a little longer. A pleasant smile was her answer, and the door closed without a sound. She soon heard him whistling softly as he lifted great cakes of snow on the broad blade of his wooden shovel. In this way, paths fit to be trodden by the Queen of the Vestals were soon made, and then father and son went away together to do the morning chores. In the meantime, breakfast had progressed bravely, but without noise. Every plate had found its place, the snowy bread and golden butter and all the etceteras of a tempting breakfast looked inviting enough for the most delicate appetite. As the time approached for the return of the father and son, the matron felt a little puzzled. Should she wake the sleeper, or— As she went hesitatingly toward the lounge, the blue eyes opened, and a soft voice said, "Where am I?" The kind face seemed to awaken memories of the past night, and there was a faint smile, followed by a shudder at the recollection of weary wanderings in darkness and blinding snow. But she had not long to dwell on these unpleasant topics, for a kind, motherly voice was already inquiring if she had rested well. The interest seemed so genuine that she exclaimed, "How good you are!" by way of reply. "You poor lamb!" and a kiss on her forehead were her answer, for the mother was saying in her heart, "Just about the age Emily would have been." After a moment's silence, she asked, "Would you like to get up now? Breakfast is ready, and the men folks will be coming in." This had the effect of thoroughly rousing the yet languid girl, and with the assistance of the hostess, she was made neat and trim. This was only accomplished in time for the entrance of those whose coming had been announced. She looked and remembered the face of the farmer as he had stood, glass in hand, looking so kindly at her. But who was this, who looked with that pair of brown eyes, half curiously, half bashfully, at her, and who bowed rather awkwardly, she thought, as Mrs. Burton said, "This is our son George." The father addressed her, "Bright as a lark this morning. One doesn't need to look twice to see the change since last night." At this a pallor swept over the delicate face, and the lips quivered. Startled at the effect of his words, he hastily placed a chair, and as she dropped into it, he added, "There, there, never mind now, it's all over," touching with his horny hand her bright, rippling hair. She looked up and smiled through the tears that had gathered on the long lashes. Seeing this, one of the group felt a sensation about his heart hitherto unknown. Breakfast over and the good matron in her charge left alone again, the latter ventured timidly to inquire how they had discovered her, for she remembered only vainly trying with benumbed fingers to undo the fastenings of the gate, and that the light in the window seemed to revolve and then go out. The manner of her rescue was described, bringing a vivid blush to her cheek when that part was reached where the young farmer had brought her in, "just like a baby," in his arms. After this, she sat for a long time in deep and apparently painful thought. When the morning's work was done and Mrs. Burton sat down to rest, the young girl began, "Your great kindness to me claims my confidence, and an explanation of the strange manner of my appearance among you." "Take your time, my dear," was the reply, "and if you never tell us, you shall be just as welcome to all we have done, or can do for you." "But I wish to tell you." No further objection was made, for really the good woman's curiosity was almost painful, and the girl began her story. "My father was a clergyman in the interior of this state, where we lived a quiet, peaceful life until I was 8 years old. Then an epidemic swept through our village, and we, with many others, were left desolate. Our calamity was not alone the loss of the best of husbands and fathers, but our means of support was also cut off, my father's salary being all our dependence. A friend of my mother wrote from our state capital, saying that there was an opening in a young ladies' seminary, and she would obtain the position for her if desired. Of course, she was very thankful for anything that would afford a respectable support for herself and child. We soon left our dear little home, and took up our abode in the city. Thenceforth my poor mother sustained a heavy weight of care in addition to her load of grief, but she bore up bravely for the sake of her child, whose opportunities for an education were better there than they could have been elsewhere. But the strain was too great for her delicate constitution. She looked like a middle-aged woman, when she should have been young in face and heart, as she really was in years. This could not last always. She broke down entirely, and I, a girl of 16, looked about for some occupation that would afford a support for myself and the dear invalid. An offer from one of the patrons of our school to take charge of the education of some of her younger children was thankfully accepted, but only a few weeks passed before I was compelled to return to my mother's side, where I soon perceived I was to watch and wait for the end. The lady in whose family I had been employed came often to see us, and comforted my mother with assurances that her home should be mine so long as I needed her care and protection. This was, of course, a great comfort to my mother, but lest by some mischance I should be thrown upon the world, she told me of a cousin, a good, kind woman, married to a well-to-do farmer, who would, she believed, give me a home in her house if ever I had occasion to seek her. I cannot tell you of the dark days that followed. My mother sank rapidly, and soon all was over. I went back to my duties. The lady was very kind and patient, I believe, and gradually my grief somewhat abated. About this time the eldest son, who had spent several years abroad, returned home. A life in Paris and at the German watering places had not improved his morals, and the first time I met him I shrank in fear from his bold looks. I tried in vain to avoid him. He sought every opportunity of placing himself in my way, and finally used such language as to compel a threat of exposure to his mother if it was repeated. A few days subsequent to this, one of the little girls came running to me, saying, "Get us ready quick, Miss Grace. We are to go for a drive in the park." I, of course, supposed the order came from her mother, and hastened to comply. We were soon standing at the entrance, ready, and the coachman drove up. Mr. Harry was there and offered to assist me. I could not refuse the proffered service, but as I gave him my hand and glanced into his face, I saw there a look of fiendish exultation that made my heart stand still with terror, which was not diminished by the almost certainty that he had climbed to a seat beside the driver after closing the door. And then the carriage was different, now that I had time to observe it, from the one we had been accustomed to go out in. All this puzzled and frightened me, but still I assured myself that no harm could come to me while the children were there. The coachman drove rapidly, and soon the trees of the park were visible through the carriage windows. Then we halted, and Mr. Harry appeared at the door. Reaching his arms to the children, he said, "Come, let us have a run." They sprang to him and were quickly set down. As I was about to follow, he leaped into the carriage which dashed away. I caught a glimpse of the coachman leading the children toward the other carriage as we were whirled past. I knew then that I was fairly entrapped and in the power of an unscrupulous man. On we went, out from the city streets, over what seemed to me miles and miles of country road. At last it grew dark, and I cowered in my corner in a perfect paroxysm of terror. He had repeatedly addressed me, sometimes in a coaxing and would-be soothing tone, and then, exasperated at what he termed my stubbornness, he would utter a half-suppressed threat. At last the carriage stopped before a large villa that seemed to be unoccupied, save one wing, where lights appeared. Lifting me to the ground, he kept a firm hold of my wrist, and led, almost dragged, me up the steps. A sharp ring was answered by a wrinkled old crone who leered at me as I was drawn into the hall, with a look scarcely less evil than that I had seen on the face of her master. Heaven help me now, I thought, and my heart, in which had been a hope that one of my own sex could not be deaf to my prayers, sank like lead. She would do anything for money. "Is everything ready, Bess?" he asked. She blinked her red eyes and nodded. "Lead on, then," was the command. She shuffled before us to the foot of a long flight of stairs, when he seemed to have changed his mind, held out his hand for the light, saying, "There, go. I know the way. You bring up something warm and nice for the little beauty." She went off chuckling as if his speech contained the very soul of wit. We ascended the stairs, passed along the broad hall, and stopped before a door which he flung open, pushing me before him into the room. He turned the key, and removing it from the lock, put it in his pocket, saying as he did so, "Now, miss, if you will be reasonable, you shall be treated all right. But if you choose to sulk and pout, it will only be the worse for you. There is not the slightest chance for you to elude me here. Old Bess, you and I are the sole occupants. No one comes near the place for months to come, when some of the servants will be sent out to get ready for mother and the rest of them." Then I knew for the first time that I was at their country villa, which I had heard was situated in a retired spot. I could now find comfort only in the thought that death was not beyond my reach, if the worst came, and it was a choice between that and dishonor. The old woman was soon heard at the door, which was unlocked for her admission. She brought in a tray containing a bottle of wine, a pot of tea, and many delicacies to tempt the appetite. A small table was drawn to my side, and these placed thereon. Then he began coaxing me to eat, but I neither could nor would. At last his patience was exhausted, and he rose, saying, "I'll tame you yet. That stubborn will of yours shall be broken, and I'll not wait always for your smiles either." And stooping, he raised my face with his hand and printed a kiss on my mouth. I struck him with all my force, a blow that cut the full red lip against the sharp white teeth, so that it bled freely. He turned livid with rage, and as he applied his handkerchief to the wound, he said savagely, "You will pay for this, my lady, before you are 24 hours older." With this he left the room, locking the door on the outside. What had I done? Had I, in my impotent rage, rendered my persecutor more merciless still? No, that could not be. Believing I might be watched, I ate a little, drank some tea, and then poured out a glass of wine. It was far from my intention to swallow it, for I thought it might be drugged. Still, if there was a spy upon my actions, it would be well to have it seen that I drank it, for then my guard would be less vigilant. I set down the glass and slowly undressed, taking care to so place every article that I would have no difficulty in finding it without a light. Having prepared the bed, I took the wine and went and stood before the grate. Raising the glass, I feigned to drink the contents, but let it fall on the rug at my feet. Then I put out the light and lay down. Surely I heard a cat-like step creeping away from my door. I had been watched, and my quiet manner, after being left alone, had disarmed suspicion. Still, I dared not stir for a long time. At last, believing it to be near midnight, I got up, finding and arranging my clothing as best I might in the pitchy darkness. Having dressed, I cautiously approached the window. Drawing aside the heavy curtain, I attempted to raise the sash, but for a long time it defied my utmost effort. I was near giving up in despair when that last terrible threat seemed to ring again in my ears. I made one more desperate trial, and to my joy felt it yielding. It was soon high enough for me to lean out and peer into the darkness below. There was no moon, but the stars gave a faint light, and I soon made out that away down, it seemed so far, was the roof of a veranda. If I could only reach it, I might possibly get to the ground by aid of the pillars. But how was that to be accomplished? The attempt seemed so hazardous. But had I not resolved to die? And here was a chance for life and freedom. I went back to the bed, removed the sheets, and knotted them firmly. Then the flannel blankets and the Marseille quilt were added to the rope, for as such I intended to use it. Having made as sure as possible of the firmness and reliability of the knots, I returned to the open window and began a search for some object to which I could fasten it. My search seemed vain. The blinds were too frail, I feared. I turned away with something like despair. Beside me stood a large bureau. A new hope came to me. Passing my hand down the smooth surface, I found the turned leg, and passing one corner of the sheet around it, I made it fast. Throwing the rest out, I prepared to descend. I could not know whether it reached the roof, and if it did not, I would not stop to think. but with a prayer in my heart for aid in my extremity, I began my descent. Oh, it was awful! I expected every moment that the fastenings would give way and I be dashed to pieces. But heaven had heard my prayer, and I reached my resting place while yet a yard of my rope remained. Creeping to the edge, I discovered that one end was enclosed by lattice work. I made my way there, and clinging with all my strength to the edge of the roof, I placed first one, then the other foot on the frail support. It did not give way, and I was soon on the ground, thanking God for my deliverance. But I was yet alone in the night, in a strange place, and might be found and captured in the morning. Still, the greatest peril past, I would hope for the future. Creeping cautiously along, I soon felt the gravel of what seemed a carriage-way beneath my feet. Stooping down, I felt the wheel marks beneath my hands, and hesitated not a moment in following it. Passing through a large gate that had been left open, I emerged upon what seemed a country road. Fear lent wings to my feet, and unmindful of the roughness of my path, I hurried on, never realizing fatigue until I had traveled what seemed miles to me. Then, all at once, my strength gave way, and I sank exhausted on the hard ground. I had not lain there many moments when I became conscious of a rumbling like that made by a heavy market wagon, and such it proved to be. As it came nearer, I could discern the white, tent-like covering, and ventured in my great fear of being overtaken and recaptured, to call out. The team was stopped, the man peering into the darkness, while he questioned, in a tone of amazement, who I was and what was wanted. I replied that I wanted to go to the country, away off from the city. "Why, little gal," he answered, "you are many a good mile from the city now." "Oh, but I must go further. Please take me with you," I pleaded. "Well, climb in, then. You're a little creature to be out so alone," in a kindly tone. I was so thankful that I could have fallen down and worshipped him. He seemed inclined to question me, and I told him I was an orphan, that my mother had lately died and left me alone in the city. We had once, a long time ago, lived in the country, and that I was going to try to find a relative of my mother's, who lived in the town of Burton. He said that was all very well, but I ought to have stopped overnight somewhere. Anybody would have taken ye in, but I suppose you was bashful and didn't like to ask. I made no comment on this supposition, and for a long time we rode on in silence. The feeling of security and my utter exhaustion combined to overcome my senses, and I should have fallen from the seat had he not perceived my danger in time to prevent it. "Poor thing," he said, "you are sleepy, and had better lie down on the bags in there," pointing with his thumb over his shoulder. I did not wait for a second invitation, but, climbing over the back of the seat, stretched myself on the bags that had contained grain. He took the buffalo robe from the seat and tossed it over me, and I slept. No queen could enjoy more profound repose on her bed of eiderdown than did I in that jolting market wagon. The voice of my friend, for such I must call him, roused me, saying, "Here we are to hum. Jump up, and I'll show you a better bed than that." I got up and looked about me. The gray morning was breaking. He helped me down, and I followed him into the house. Handing me a lighted candle, he opened a door and said, "You just go right up them stairs, and you'll find a bed. Tumble in and sleep as long as you want to." I obeyed his directions and undressed the second time and soon slept. Breakfast had long been over, and the good man gone to his work when I came down. His wife seemed a little shy and suspicious, asking if I wanted to get work, and without waiting for a reply went on, "You don't look as if you could do much, but there's Squire Dennison's wife wants to get somebody to help take care of the baby and do chores. Maybe you'd do. Anyhow, when you've had some breakfast, you better try. They live a couple of mile up the road." She was evidently anxious to be rid of me, but she had kept some breakfast warm, which she set before me, and I thankfully partook of it. I found that I had my purse in my pocket, and offered to pay her for her own and her husband's favors. This she refused, and I left her only thanks for both. Of course, I had no intention of looking up Mrs. Squire Dennison and her baby, but meant to inquire my way to the nearest village, where I could learn where I was, and probably find a stage-coach that would carry me to the neighborhood of the friend I was seeking. I tried to follow the directions given me at a house where I made inquiries, but the snow was coming on. I got bewildered, and you know the rest. Had it not been for the kindness of yourself and family, I should not want a home any more." "You poor persecuted child!" exclaimed her listener, wiping her eyes, which had frequently overflowed during the recital. "As if any kindness of ours could make up for what you have suffered. But you have not told me your name yet." "Vincent, Grace Vincent." "And your mother? Her name was Eleanor Gardner before her marriage, was it not?" A look of bewildered surprise greeted this question. "Yes, I see it is so. I thought as much. I am the cousin of whom your dear mother told you, and you shall be a daughter to us and take the place of our lost Emily." This was too much for Grace, and bursting into tears, she clasped her arms about the neck of this her second mother, who folded her tenderly to her heart, rocking her as if it had indeed been her little lost darling. So father and son found them when they came in a half-hour later to dinner, but none was visible, so absorbed had this model housekeeper been in the recital, and then in her new-found happiness, that it had not occurred to her that the hour was approaching. "Why, wife," said the farmer, "this is the first time in 25 years that you've forgot to get dinner when you've been able to be about." "Never mind, father. You have a daughter in place of little Emily, and you George a sister, so you can afford to eat one cold dinner." Such was their confidence in the good judgment of wife and mother that they did not question her decision or hesitate to believe it a wise one, though the young man thought, "It will do nicely for her to be a daughter to them, but she shall be more than a sister to me." So little Grace learned to be a farmer's daughter, and in time a farmer's wife, with her better scholarship guiding the clear intellect of her husband, at the same time looking up to and resting in his strong good sense and sterling worth. Here culture and taste have lent a grace to the old farmhouse, both without and within, that makes it now one of the loveliest spots on the old Helderberg. End of section 17, read by Elsie Selwyn.